Welcome back to You Can't Say That in Court, a podcast by Rise Women's Legal Center. I'm Vicky Law.
And I'm Stephanie Melnick. We are your hosts as we continue this conversation about survivors of violence navigating the BC family law system. We recognize that the legal system we have in BC is colonial and causes harm to families, which disproportionately impacts Indigenous people.
By speaking openly about these harms, we hope to raise awareness about the challenges survivors face as they navigate the colonial family law system. Our podcast is an attempt to collectively identify the barriers and advocate for positive changes to be made. Thank you for joining. Our podcast series will discuss difficult topics such as gender-based violence and intimate partner violence. This includes physical, sexual, emotional, psychological, and financial abuse. Please be aware that this is a thread that is woven throughout all the episodes, and we hope you will take care of yourselves however you need.
Hi everyone, this is episode 6 of You Can't Say That in Court. Today we have our colleague with us, Sam Davis, who is a researcher with RISE, and we're looking into why courthouses may not be safe for everybody. Sam, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me, Vicky and Steph.
We're excited that you're here. Yay!
Yeah, so we're talking about courthouse safety. This topic has been something we've done research on for quite a few years now at RISE. It really started after hearing from a lot of clients' firsthand experiences as survivors navigating courts and not feeling safe in doing so. And so back in 2022, our colleague Haley Rymack wrote and published a report called Creating Safety in BC Courts. And this project was really focused on answering the question of whether or not there's a way we can change courthouses and the processes within them to make survivors less susceptible to violence by their abusers. This report created a lot of different recommendations, anywhere from improving paging systems to safe interview rooms for clients to wait, increasing court support workers, and it also recommended that an audit was done of courthouses. So that is kind of where my research project with Steph picked up. We looked at 73 of the 84 court locations in BC, trying to assess for a series of different safety metrics that were really based on Haley's recommendations in that 2022 report.
Before you dive into your finding, Sam and Steph, maybe I just want to ask, why aren't courthouses safe? What are your clients and survivors telling you about their safety in these places?
Yeah, it's pretty interesting because survivors' experiences have been shared with all of us at Rise, I think, over the years. And it all makes a lot of sense when you hear someone talk about how intimidating it is to walk into a giant building that might be like very colonial with stone arches or columns or whatever, or a really tiny one where court is just held as a circuit, and there's no space to move around or whatever. And it's really interesting how the basics are difficult. So just being able to get to and from the place you're supposed to go, like the courtroom, easily. Being able to wait somewhere where you're comfortable. Being able to drink water while you're waiting. Knowing when your matter is going to be called. Like, how long do you have to wait? People don't know these things. And especially if they don't have a lawyer or a support worker or someone who's familiar with the space to help guide them through it. It's really basic stuff that becomes super intimidating and really stressful.
Yeah, and when you add on that they're not just going through this process on their own, oftentimes, especially our clients are going in at the same time as their abusive ex-partner, and they're having to navigate the space at the same time that their ex is navigating the space. And so that can add something really serious to the level of risk, or even just like the perceived risk that the client might be facing in walking into the court. So that's, navigating the same hallway that might be quite narrow and dark. It might be coming in and out the same entrance point or even entering into the courtroom, filing documents at the court registry, you might bump into them. So yeah, there's quite a few things on top of a really stressful day where you're going to be in front of a judge or even just filing documents. You know, we hear from clients all the time they don't know even how to get to the place that you do that. And navigating the space can just be so intimidating and frightening that any of these factors contributing to making that worse has a real impact.
Yeah, and Vicky, you and I have talked in previous episodes about the processes being difficult
Yeah.
for the dynamics of coercive and controlling behavior or family violence, because in a court process, when an application is filed, a response is also required, and you can't just
Mm-hmm.
ignore the person. So, safety planning for a survivor might involve blocking phone calls, cutting off emails, just really avoiding the other person so that they are safe, like so that the abusive person isn't causing harm to the survivor anymore and the survivor's safer. Court processes, and now what Sam and I have really discovered in this research is court houses and locations are the complete opposite of that safety planning because it requires engagement unless someone wants to be penalized for not answering an application or not showing up for court. Like it's a really huge impact of not engaging in the process. So that's kind of the opposite of
Yeah.
some of what we've talked about.
Yeah, I do. I'm sure all of us have also done safety planning with a specific client for a specific court date, right? Like if you're driving, come at this
Right.
time, I'll meet you here, we'll go up the elevator together, or like get sheriffs involved or whatnot. So
Hmm.
the safety planning within going to the courthouse, leaving the courthouse, and while you're in the courthouse is also really important. So I'm really curious. You checked out these courthouse locations. What did you find?
Oh
Yeah, we
gosh, so
found
much.
a lot of different things.
Yeah.
We had sort of five key findings that came out of this project. And I think one of the really big ones, and we've already alluded to this, is that it can be really difficult to avoid an abusive ex in most court locations. So, like I've kind of already said, from the point that you are kind of either in the parking lot or getting off public transit or maybe walking up to the building is when that sort of risk of safety starts to engage. And, entering into the building and having to find where you go, um, you can so easily run into another person, especially if you're going to the same place. We found that, whether that's having very few entry and exit points into various parts of the building, whether that's only having one place to pick up your court documents at the registry for the family desk, or maybe, it's all combined and there's only one spot to pick up anything, regardless of the type of matter you have. The bathrooms are all in the same location. You might have another sort of collection point at, a staircase or the elevators, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and what I think really resonated for Sam and I when we were going through all these different locations and seeing some similarities about how no matter what the space was, it was oftentimes designed for the people who work in the building. And that makes a
Hmm.
lot of sense because that's generally the place you start from. You're like, okay, we are going to try to administer justice here, and we have judges that need to sit
Mm-hmm.
on a bench, and we have lawyers who need to come in and out this way, and we have court staff and registries and sheriffs, and all of these door placements, and everything is really giving a lot of consideration to the people who work in those buildings every day or every month or whatever, and not a lot of consideration in the design of the building was given to especially survivors of violence. Also, because there is oftentimes an assumption that everyone coming to court is wanting to be there to resolve something, and that they are probably, or there's the assumption that they're coming in on equal footing with the opposing party, and that's just not the case with survivors of violence. And so that particular lens of looking at the design of the buildings and the amenities that are available from the perspective of the survivor is what really, I think, underlined for us that although these are really simple, basic things we were looking for, they have a tremendous impact on the experience of the survivor.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing I kind of want to add to that, that's a bit of a tangent, is that in a lot of ways, court locations are also, especially traditional ones, designed to be secure in the event that there are people in custody in the court
Right.
location, right? And so, of course, that's a very important thing, and there's a lot of security measures in place, but often those are focused on criminal matters. And we're not often thinking about what it means to be someone navigating the family law system
Mm-hmm.
and what the impact of safety is for them. And I think that's one thing that we really want to highlight with this report and all of our reports at Rise is that the people who are court users, who are folks who are navigating the family law system, we do need to be paying attention to them and their safety because there are significant safety risks for a lot of folks.
Mm-hmm. You
Yeah.
both mentioned traditional courthouses or like the
Mm.
physical aspects. Like when we think of like traditional courthouses, like thinking of movies, there's like sheriffs,
Hmm.
security screening at the front, desks with court clerks, different rooms with courtrooms. That's what I picture when you say like traditional courthouses. But what do you mean? Like, because there's traditional, obviously, and then maybe non-traditional. What is the non-traditional?
Yeah, so I think in terms of the traditional piece, another thing I'd add to what you said, Vicky, is that often they are purpose built for court, and that's one of the, if not the only thing that takes place in that space, right?
Mhm.
Other non-traditional court locations that we saw in BC were First Nations spaces. We
Mm-hmm.
also saw Service BC buildings being used quite a lot, so different services would be co-located within a building or a space. We also saw some community centers, municipal hall. We also saw actually a hotel being used as well, which was an interesting sort of addition to the variety of different locations utilized across the province.
And 3 strip malls.
Yes.
3 places where strip malls are used. And to be fair, the people who work in those court locations are not thrilled necessarily about the strip mall context either. But it's
Mm-hmm.
interesting that a purpose-built location, which is mostly what we refer to as a traditional courthouse, like
Mm-hmm.
the big stone building, I've heard a couple of people say, oh, the beautiful courthouses, whatever. And I'm like, not beautiful to everyone, just for the record.
Hmm.
They're very
Yeah.
colonial for sure, and architecturally could be seen as beautiful in some circumstances, but they're also meant to be imposing. That is part of why they were built that way. It's interesting that some of the more ad hoc locations where um, BC has decided we are holding court, probably circuit court, in this spot. We just don't have a courthouse. So where are we going to hold it? Oh, a recreation center or a First Nations gathering space or something where they just kind of, I'm using air quotes, make do with
Mm-hmm.
another space. There are actually some advantages to those spaces as
Hmm.
well. So it's a real variety in BC, but well over half of them are these traditional purpose-built buildings. Some of them are very modern with lots of glass. They're not all like big, imposing, old-fashioned looking stone buildings, but some of them certainly are.
What are the advantages? Like you mentioned
Yeah.
advantages in holding them in like other locations.
Yeah, I think there are quite a few advantages to especially community center spaces. And I think when we went into a lot of them, we found that the spaces in general were very welcoming. They had a very, community sense to them. Oftentimes there were posters or local artists' artwork on the walls, children's art, different activities going on. There were staff, there were, community members in the building. Oftentimes, there were multiple ways in and out of the building itself. There were various places to wait that weren't, immediately in front of the room that court was being held in. Often the courtrooms themselves had multiple pathways in and out as well, which you wouldn't see in a traditional courthouse because there's usually one door for security reasons. Just a few different things that really made the space feel less intimidating, and what is often a very intimidating and like our adversarial process in family
Yeah.
court. Yeah.
I think the buildings that are built for court are, yeah, they just tend to not have a lot of these things we are looking for. But a building like a recreation center or community center is built on purpose to welcome the community in. And you can really feel that difference with, like you're saying, the number of doors, even just like the number of people around, like at a front desk somewhere, just to ask questions like, where am I going? You know, we went to one recreation center that was holding court, and ICBC was in there as well. So there was just always someone at a desk going, oh, hey, where are you trying to go? Also, it really hit home for me that community centers tend to be more accessible for someone with mobility issues, like if
Yes.
they're in a wheelchair or crutches or have a stroller that they're pushing. It's just a recreation center is going to address those accessibility needs naturally in their building design. So although it's not, there are some definite downsides for the way the courts want to run
Hmm.
a court day. Yeah, the recreation, civic centers, First Nations gathering places were a lot more welcoming and a lot less barriers, even less of a stigma. I mean, if you're walking through the front door of a recreation center, no one knows necessarily why you're there. But if,
Hmm.
for example, you're walking through the front door of a courthouse, and we have heard from other survivors that on the day of court, if it's a small community, you can see everybody walking to court or driving, and you know exactly who's in court that day. Like there's no anonymity, there's no protection against your personal business or anything like that. So I think the stigma is also reduced a lot less. I don't want it to come across like I think that recreation centers are the perfect solution to some of these challenges, but it was interesting to see the advantages of those spaces.
And
Yeah,
these
definitely.
locations were in like smaller, more remote communities.
Oftentimes, yeah.
Oftentimes, yes. Yes,
I
that's
I
right.
also want to say they often have running water and food for people, which was another really big finding for us was that there were a lot of court locations that didn't have functional water fountains where, court users would have to bring their own water bottle or cup and fill it up in a bathroom sink that might not have consumable water. It might not have cold water if that's what they're looking for. So yeah, oftentimes those locations will often have access to drinking water as well, which is an advantage.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
And
it's
it's
tough when like your court appearance is like the full day, or you don't know when you're being called and you're waiting the full day and you don't have water and food
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
and you can't
exactly
leave.
it. And yeah, and it's funny because before going to court, you wouldn't really think about that. But even like I know, Sam, you've probably done this, and in my previous work with victim services, I've done it where I will be the one to show up with like I'll have tea and water and granola bars and, grounding things, just a whole bunch of things that I know the courthouse isn't providing. But if you've never been before, and in particular, if you don't have a lawyer or a support worker, like we said previously, then you just don't think necessarily about that. So,
Or you
yeah,
have so much going on, like you are already taking the day off work, you've got to find childcare for your kids. The last thing that you're thinking about probably is small things you can do to take care of yourself to prep for the day. You
yeah.
should just be able to show up to the courthouse and have access to basic needs.
Yeah. Can we do a tiny rant about how family matters are treated on a court list, though, especially when criminal matters are being heard on the same day, or even traffic
Mm.
matters or whatever it is. Family always gets bumped to the end from a priority point of view. I understand why that is. I have, of course, some context in the criminal side where people's rights and freedoms around potential jail time means that they do need to take priority. But how hard is this on survivors of violence attending for a family matter where they literally have no idea after, like Sam said, making all those plans to be there that day, not going to work, taking the day off, finding childcare, all the stuff. They don't even know if their matter is going to be heard that day. It's not impossible that they would just run out of time and they'd have to adjourn. It's so hard to prepare.
Yeah. An important piece of that too is that's often happening in smaller communities where people are also less likely to have access to legal services and support because of underfunding, there's fewer family lawyers, so many different factors contributing to them showing up on their own without support.
And oftentimes those court dates are very coveted, right? There's like only a few
Hmm.
court dates per month or every
Yes.
2 months. And so when your matter
Even
doesn't
every
get
4 months.
heard, oh gosh. So
Yeah.
yeah, when your
Yeah.
matter doesn't get
Yeah.
heard in like the 1 or 2 days every 4 months, it's getting being pushed for 4 months away. And it's not like family law matters about children. They're like you can just pause
Right.
children's concerns that they're still ongoing. So,
Hmm.
oh,
Yeah.
good rant.
Good rant.
Yeah. Good
Okay.
note.
Back to findings. One of the things I did want to make sure we talked about were some of the resources that are available in the court locations, because Sam and I were also checking for, like, what do the
Mm.
pamphlets look like, the posters on the walls, and is there someone to just ask questions of, those sorts of things. And it's very simple. And what someone needs on a day that they're there for a court appearance might be different than, say, a court that's in session every day and the courthouse and registry are just open,
Hmm.
like a staffed location in the bigger centers, where someone might just come in that day to look specifically for resources. But we wanted to make sure that there were some basic family law resources for anyone to have something to take away with them. So that was one of the things we found was lacking. And I think I mean, we know that one of the explanations is that a lot of things have moved online and it's hard to keep up with updates and make sure that resources are always current. So QR codes do seem like a good idea at first, because then
Hmm.
someone can be taken to an updated internet site and rely on that information, whereas paper, printed pamphlets can go out of date more quickly. But when someone is under a very stressful situation, it's hard for them necessarily to absorb the information. So having a paper pamphlet to take home, read at their leisure, it can be really useful. So, yeah.
And building on that too, it gives people a piece of paper to be able to write notes down if they,
Yeah.
need to. And beyond that, a lot of folks don't have access to internet, whether that be data on their phones or at their home or wherever they reside. It's not accessible for everyone, and I think we really have to remember that it is important to continue to have print resources. I know it might feel a bit outdated, like you said, Steph, with the move away from that, but it really is something that I think we need to continue to prioritize so that it is accessible for folks. And I don't know, if I was going through a really stressful family law situation and I was trying to read a massive website with so much overwhelming information, I'm honestly probably pretty likely to shut down and not read it. Whereas when something's in a smaller pamphlet form, it's maybe a bit more plain language, it's so much easier to absorb information and kind of get a sense of, where things are at. So,
Yeah. The benefits of a pamphlet are that it's just going to have introductory information, just something
Hmm.
digestible that you can
mhm.
absorb. It is limited in how much information can be crammed onto, a trifold pamphlet, whereas a website can just be overwhelming. Endless links, endless
Hmm.
information, scroll forever, just become overwhelmed and not be able to absorb it. So, yeah, it's funny how a lot of the things we were checking for, like, is there cold drinking water? Are there pamphlets? They're very basic things on one hand, but on the other hand, they're really that necessary entry point to engage in the system and be able to engage in your own hearing or matter that when it's called, so that you have that basic level of calm and hydration and nourishment, whatever it is you need to be able to get in front of the judge and say what you need to say. Um, yeah. Is there anything else that really stands out for you, Sam, that you want to make sure that we mention?
I think physical accessibility is one that is really important that we should highlight. And, we've said this quite a few times, whether that be in this report or otherwise, that, courthouses are supposed to be places that anyone can access. It's supposed to be a place of justice, of accessing safety, etc. And one thing that we found was that unless you are able-bodied and, able to navigate space without any limitations, getting to and from court, being in the court location might actually be quite a challenge for you. We saw some pretty shocking things in different court locations across the province. We went into one bathroom at a court location where like the stall door was hanging off of the wall, basically. Like it didn't even close properly. We saw many, many locations where bathrooms were not physically accessible, whether that because of the size of the stalls or the bathroom itself, or, a lot of doors are not automated in court locations around BC, whether that's front doors or bathroom doors or courtroom doors. So that was another significant consideration. I don't want to put a specific location sort of under the spotlight here, but there is one court location in BC where you cannot access the courtrooms by elevator or escalator, even. It is exclusively by way of stairs that you get to the courtrooms. So if you have any mobility limitations, you often will have to be carried up to the courtroom, which in 2026 in British Columbia is just a really unacceptable requirement to be able to access court, in my opinion.
Yeah. Right. Now, the upside of all of this is that in talking with registry staff and other staff that work in the court locations, they are mostly aware of these issues and, generally speaking, very concerned about it, want to make a difference, want to make these changes. So that's kind of the next step of the research, is looking at, okay, we've done this scan of a number of locations, most of the locations across BC. We now get a good handle on what's not working very well for survivors of violence. What can we do to compensate? We're not going to recommend tearing down a building and redesigning it to be purpose-built for survivors. What we want to look for are creative solutions that are going to compensate for some of the problems. And I think Sam and I, and Vicky, you as well, we're all encouraged by how supportive the government is on making these changes. So the next phase of research is Sam and I having tested some of the interventions or some of the solutions that we thought might work, so that if we're going to be recommending changes or the government's going to make some changes, we want to make sure that they're actually going to fulfill the purpose. So we're trying to look at practical things that we can change. And I'm hoping, Sam, you could come back and join us to talk about kind of the pilot phase where we were testing some of these things once we're ready to release that out to the public.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, it was so good to have you talking with us today, my research partner. Yay. So yeah, pilot phase is next for this research. But Vicky, you and I were planning on talking about some other kind of more tangible solutions that we can look at for more generally in the family law system in future episodes. So stay tuned for those. Yeah, I think we'll wrap it up there, and we'll talk to everyone next time. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks,
you.
everyone. Bye.
Everything that we have said today is not legal advice. If you or someone you know needs legal advice, please consult with a lawyer. Thanks for listening to our episode about courthouse safety. I wanted to let you know that you can find the full report about our findings for courthouses across BC using the link in the show notes for this podcast, or by doing an internet search for the report title, which is A Comprehensive Assessment of BC Court Locations. We are very grateful to the Ministry of the Attorney General of BC for funding this research and for their collaboration to improve courthouses, in particular for survivors of violence.